Imagine being kidnapped, taken hostage, and held against your will for weeks or even years. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant threat of violence or death would be enough to break anyone. But what if, after all that time, you began to develop feelings of empathy, even love for your captor? This is known as Stockholm Syndrome. Welcome to our latest video, where we'll be delving into this intriguing phenomenon. The term Stockholm Syndrome was coined in 1973 after a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, where hostages began to sympathize with their captors and defend them from the police. This event sparked a wave of interest and research into the psychological phenomenon of captives forming emotional bonds with their captors. Stockholm Syndrome is often defined as a psychological response where hostages or abuse victims develop feelings of affection, trust, or even love for their captors or abusers. This can occur in a range of situations, including kidnappings, hostage situations, and cases of domestic abuse. To understand Stockholm Syndrome, it's important to examine the psychological mechanisms that may contribute to its development. One theory is that it's a survival mechanism, where hostages or victims develop positive feelings towards their captors as a means of self-preservation. In these situations, the victim may believe that the captor is their only source of survival, and that cooperating or developing positive feelings towards them is necessary for their survival. Another theory is that Stockholm Syndrome is a form of cognitive dissonance, where victims reconcile their conflicting feelings of fear and anxiety towards their captors by developing positive feelings towards them. In these circumstances, the victim may feel a sense of guilt or responsibility for their captivity, and developing positive feelings towards the captor may help reduce those negative emotions. There may also be other factors that contribute to the development of the syndrome, such as a history of trauma, low self-esteem, and a lack of social support. These factors can make it difficult for the victim to resist the captor's control and may increase their vulnerability to developing positive feelings towards their captor. It can manifest in various ways, such as defending the captor's beliefs, developing a romantic attraction to the captor, or feeling a sense of loyalty towards the captor. However, it's important to note that these feelings are not always present in cases of Stockholm Syndrome, and that each individual's response to trauma is unique. There have been numerous high-profile cases of Stockholm Syndrome throughout history, with some of the most well-known examples occurring in cases of kidnapping, hostage situations, and domestic abuse. One of the most famous cases of Stockholm Syndrome occurred in 1974, when heiress Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army. After being held captive for several weeks, Hearst began to sympathize with her captors and even participated in their criminal activities. She later claimed that she had been brainwashed and that her participation in the crimes was involuntary. Another well-known case of the syndrome occurred in 2002, when Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her home in Utah. She was held captive for 9 months and was repeatedly abused by her captors. However, when she was finally rescued, she expressed empathy for her captors and even asked for leniency for them in court. Stockholm Syndrome is a complex psychological phenomenon that has been the subject of numerous myths and misconceptions. One common misconception is that Stockholm Syndrome is a rare occurrence. However, research suggests that it's more common than people realize and can occur in a range of situations, including domestic abuse, cults, and prisoner of war camps. Another myth is that Stockholm Syndrome only occurs in cases where the victim is physically trapped. However, psychological captivity can also contribute to the development of Stockholm Syndrome, such as in cases of emotional or mental abuse. There is also a misconception that Stockholm Syndrome is a form of love or affection towards the captor. However, Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological response that may involve developing positive feelings towards the captor as a means of self-preservation or as a way of reconciling conflicting emotions. Prevention and treatment of Stockholm Syndrome can be complex, as it involves addressing the underlying psychological mechanisms that contribute to its development. However, there are strategies that can be employed to reduce the likelihood of its occurrence and to help those who have already experienced it. One crucial step in prevention is to promote healthy relationships and boundaries. This can help individuals develop a strong sense of self-esteem and a support network, which can make them less vulnerable to the psychological manipulation of captors or abusers. For those who have already experienced Stockholm Syndrome, treatment may involve a combination of psychological counseling and support from loved ones. The goal of treatment is to help the individual process their trauma and develop healthier coping mechanisms. By recognizing the signs and symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome and seeking help when needed, individuals can break free from the psychological captivity that may keep them trapped in harmful situations. The concept of Stockholm Syndrome has been explored in various forms of popular culture, including movies and art. One of the most famous depictions of Stockholm Syndrome is in the book and subsequent movie, The Silence of the Lambs. In the story, the protagonist, FBI trainee Clarice Starling, develops a close relationship with the infamous serial killer Hannibal Lecter, who had been holding her captive. While Starling is initially frightened of Lecter, she comes to see him as a trusted ally and even turns to him for help in solving a case. The painting Judith and Holofernes by Artemisia Gentileschi is a famous example of Stockholm Syndrome in art. In the painting, Judith, a Jewish widow, is depicted holding the head of Holofernes, an Assyrian general whom she had seduced and then beheaded. While the painting has been interpreted in various ways, some have suggested that it portrays Stockholm Syndrome, as Judith had developed feelings for her captor. While some depictions may be more accurate than others, they all contribute to the ongoing discussion and understanding of this complex psychological phenomenon. In conclusion, Stockholm Syndrome is a complex psychological trauma that can occur in a variety of situations. While it may be confusing and difficult to understand, it's important to recognize the signs and symptoms and seek help when needed. By educating ourselves and promoting healthy relationships and boundaries, we can reduce the likelihood of its occurrence and support those who have already experienced it. Thank you for watching.